Welcome to the Akzo Insights podcast, where we help B2B executives deliver better results with the latest ideas in change and innovation for your organization. The episodes feature fascinating discussions with interesting people who have a great story to tell, as well as our original content communicated with AI voices. If you can, please read the show notes to get the most from each episode. Thank you for listening. We hope you enjoy it.
I think many supply chain professionals will realize quite early on that once you take a step back and you start mapping your incoming raw materials, you start mapping the flow through your manufacturing sites, you start mapping your distribution, all the way from the raw materials or sometimes even one step, behind, and then also all the way through to your customers. Then you will begin realizing, in most cases, at least in my view, that they are actually quite different.
Welcome back to Akzo Insights. This is the podcast for B2B executives navigating the continuum of unknowns in a complex, adaptive world. I'm your host, Mark Blackwell, and today's guest is a leader who is currently standing at a fascinating professional inflection point. She's an engineer by training and a master of large-scale human systems. Her career trajectory is a roadmap of industrial excellence, spanning the iconic operations of Lego, the cooperative complexities of Orkla Foods, the global rigor of DuPont, and that's, by the way, where I met this lady we're going to be talking to today. And more recently, she served as the Chief Integrated Supply Chain Officer and Executive Committee member at Akzo Nobel, where she led a massive global organization of 14,000 employees across 130 manufacturing sites. But as we record this, she's preparing for a significant homecoming. On March the 1st, 2026, she will officially step into her new role as Chief Supply Chain Officer for Orkla Foods. She's returning to the very company where her leadership career really took off. She's now tasked with transforming their value chain into a simplified, high-growth engine. She is a leader who proves that the most powerful tools for a chief supply chain officer aren't just technical, they are empathy, authentic confidence, and the ability to drive commercial excellence through human-centric transformation. In this episode, we'll discuss her journey from procurement specialist to the boardroom, her philosophy on breaking down functional silos, and how she prepares 14,000 people to navigate complexity rather than just complicatedness. Please welcome to the show, Karen-Marie Katholm.
Thank you very much, Mark. And indeed, we go back quite a long time, back to the early days after DuPont acquired the Nisco. So really nice to be here, and thank you very much for the warm introduction.
Well, let's see if that experience pops up in today's conversation. But you've been blessed with a huge variety of experiences to fall on or back on to today. So I'm going to be fascinated to learn more as well as some of those times. So I think, just to begin with, you've navigated from your start of your career as a technical procurement expert to a member of executive committee and sitting on boards in a variety of companies. How has your definition of a successful supply chain changed over the years?
Yeah, indeed, to your point, it's been a fabulous journey so far, having worked for a number of different companies across different industries. And also actually different ownership, which I think is quite interesting. I mean, there are really different dynamics and decision-making processes, whether you're working in a cooperative, in a listed company, or in a privately owned company. So that in itself is quite fascinating. And also having worked across different industries over the years, there's many things to learn. There's many things to pick up. There's many, areas of excellence, pocket of excellence that you can also really bring from one industry to the other. And then to your point, early career, indeed, I started up in procurement, and I have an engineering background, and actually was during a 5-year study taken through lots of marketing, lots of commercial. It was, a lot about exporting of products and services. However, I really felt during the study that I was missing the price building of raw materials. I was missing, what about volatility? How does it all work? And also really understanding the details of how you're building a price, then ultimately of your service or of your product. So really having that other side of the equation, that has helped me tremendously to understand, let's say, the P&L, obviously, but also really understand the incoming, let's say, part of the cost of goods sold, but also, let's say, the go-to market, the R&D part, etc. So that's really been that's been very very helpful to understand both. So it was a very deliberate and conscious decision actually to go more into the granularity early on. To your question about what I've seen more from a complicated engineering to kind of, let's say, successful supply chains. I kind of began early on really kind of working and thinking around 3 dimensions, around the processes, but also around the systems, let's call it the toolbox, IT, but also the capabilities. And early on, and probably to your question also, let's say coming from an engineering or with an engineering background, then my main focus before the leadership part really took off, that was indeed very much around the toolbox and also the processes. And then kind of the real importance out of the 3 dimensions, the capability part, that kind of came a little bit later on, I would say. But what really characterizes a successful supply chain is that it has to be supply chain, no matter which industry, no matter which company, that is fit for purpose. And there has to be clear, let's say, clarity, let's say, from within the organization also about, is it very much a time of cost-cutting mode? Is it a time of operational excellence? Is it a time of where you're really funneling growth? So really kind of define that and be clear about that. And obviously, and ideally, that also changes over time. So it's not constantly only, let's say, cost cutting, but it's also really turned into an engine that is, funneling growth ultimately for the company. And it can also work quite well to kind of do both. So one does really not rule out the other. As long as the message is clear and as long as your end-to-end supply chain strategy is very well connected with the overall business strategy or corporate strategy, that is really a critical starting point. Those two, they have to go hand in hand.
Interesting. So what point in your career, was there an inflection point or a wake up one day morning when you realized that you had to move from being a technical expert on to facing the complexity and the adaptive challenges? And if I just may recount a personal story, when I remember one of the first times I ever met you was sitting in an office in Copenhagen, and I remember it well. And we were talking about the Heifetz story of the balcony and the dance floor. And I have to say, you were one of the first executives who I ever met spoke about that with authentic passion. And I just hand that to you, Karen-Marie.
Yeah, thank you very much. I do recall we had many good conversations early on, and also remember coming from a much smaller company than what DuPont was back then. It was very overwhelming to become part of such a true global company and understand, let's say, the language, understand the way of working. There were many new tools in the toolbox. There were many new processes. There was a world of opportunities on capabilities we could tap into. So really understanding about DuPont Production Systems, DPS, also DuPont Integrated Business Management, DIBM, as a couple of examples, really kind of opening up that it was kind of an extended S&OP process, sales and operations planning process, which many would work with. And then to your point about, let's say, for me at least, as a leader, to understand the image of the dance floor and also the balcony moment. And I think as a leader, it's important that you kind of understand and realize what's going on the dance floor. However, you're not really supposed as a leader on an ongoing basis to be dancing around on the dance floor. That's why you definitely need to make sure you have the right team members. But there has to be like one dance. It cannot be to stay in that area. It cannot be both a waltz and it can be tango or whatever at the same point in time. So you have to be clear about what's kind of happening, what's going on the dance floor. Are there the capabilities in place also to dance, whatever dance should be danced? As a leader, I mean, have those balcony moments on and off to find out what is really happening. So go also and check in on the dance floor, on everybody also around, and then also let's say again, sometimes get up on the balcony to try to get the bigger and the broader perspective of what is working well, what is actually not. It also gives you a lot of insight, but also take the time and the moments to observe, to listen, to reflect, and then again make your judgment calls. Because there has to be also a given direction to those that are on the so-called dance floor. That really, in my optic, has to come from the leader. So yes, I have also been early career where I was more the technical one. I was the one on the dance floor for sure. I was that in a number of roles. I also truly enjoyed that. But then at some point in time, I also felt that time had really come, and I was given great opportunities, by the way, by my former bosses to also get into leadership, and I have really truly enjoyed that, and super passionate about being a leader and get the best potential out of everybody.
So if we can extend that, the other thing is you often talk about the importance of soft skills as being really critical. Why are these human-centric skills so important when you're in an organization like Akzo Nobel with 14,000 employees? Can you recount some examples?
Yeah, I think actually that the technical skills are also important. So again, one does not rule out the other, but the technical skills are important. The soft skills I also find super critical. So the technical skills, I would say it's for me a bit of a prerequisite. If you are operating a given line, if you are, operating a reactor, a packaging line, whatever you're operating, you really have to possess the technical skills to be able to do your job. The same goes if you're working in demand planning, supply planning, in distribution, if you're driving a forklift truck, you need to possess the skills that really make you excellent at do whichever job you're doing across the end-to-end supply chain area. Everybody comes with a different skill set, and everybody's really, the expert in their field. So what would kind of tie everybody together, so to speak? That's for me where the soft skills also come in. That is a matter also as a leader to kind of be clear about the narrative. What are we trying to achieve? What are we trying to change? And that can be lots of different things, again, over time. And that also comes back to the strategy, obviously, but also, very importantly, the execution. And what does that all actually mean? I think it's critical, again, in no matter what context you're in, that you can see yourself as part of the strategy, in this particular area, as part of the end-to-end supply chain strategy. That is really well linked and overall supporting the business strategy. And if you cannot see yourself in that strategy, then obviously we as leaders, we have a problem. I ultimately have a problem leading a team. Remember, everybody comes with different background, different skill set. There's a different cultural component. Again, if you're in a very global context, at least, there's language barriers. So also, let's say, the narrative. So I would typically tend to try to use different illustrations for also getting everybody on board. And then I would also take the time, and I'm sure some of my former colleagues and plant managers in particular would definitely testimony to that. Take a lot of time when I'll be doing the plant tours, the Gamba walks, etc. And really, no matter where I would go to, also where I don't speak the local language, I would really be keen to also interact with the operators, with shop floor, having somebody help me to translate, etc., to understand, what is it actually you're doing? Can you see any improvements? Is there something that is not working? Just to make sure that we get, let's say, via the soft skills, a strong communication, a clear narrative, but also listening. I mean, there's a reason why we have 2 ears and 1 mouth, and now you'll make me do lots of talking today and not so much listening in this context. But I mean, as leaders, I find it extremely important to listen and really understand from within the organization what is working, what is not. Because everybody's really working within their different remit on a daily basis, and they know a whole lot better than I would do, as an example, by not being present each and every day in each and every location, obviously. So that's where the soft skills come from. And then I'll probably also just add one thing. In addition to to the 5 years engineering study. Then I also took an executive MBA in change management some years back in time. That was actually quite fantastic, quite insightful. It gives you a lot of different understanding as to how are we changing as human beings, and it's really from the early adapters to the laggers and everybody in between. Also, again, as part of the narrative, be very crisp and clear that it's not a one size fits all. We are not just all jumping for the sake of a change. Some takes a bit more convincing. Some it's a matter of trying to, articulate things in a different way, but really be very clear about, trying to illustrate, visualize what is the end game. And that's for me where the soft skills comes in. But I'm not saying it's an either or. It's the soft skills, but it's also the technical capabilities.
So you're talking about change management. I guess change processes don't come much bigger than the change at Akzo Nobel, where you took 13 separate supply chains and brought them into a one supply chain integrated operations, as I understand it.
Yeah.
Now, change in small organizations has its own challenges, but how on earth did you cope with that many people and that much complexity? I think you had 130 manufacturing sites. Can you give some guidance, what went well, what didn't go so well, what you learned from the process? It seems to be an amazing journey.
Yeah, it has really been an amazing journey, and the team is still on a fabulous journey. It is really a true transformation. Also looking into how are the different supply chains actually working. And I think having a differentiated approach in your supply chain is very critical, because in most companies, there's a big difference between your end market, the competitive landscape, and also, let's say, your different products or services. And what we were working through was really to look into trying to define the characteristics of the different supply chains. And some of the products, some of the markets, due to customer requirements, due to competitive landscape, etc. It was all about being very agile, very much on time, not to stop any lines of any customers. Cost was not really ruling. Then there would be other supply chains where it was a matter of more simple and efficient, big volumes, typically lower margins, and again, cost was really of the essence. So really trying to take a bit of a step back, again, you can say a step up on the balcony to understand what is the starting point. Why are we not having, really good service levels? Why is it that in some areas we are challenged on cost? Why is it in some areas that we have the right products but in the wrong place? So really think about differentiation and try to map your internal/external end-to-end supply chains. Because I think quite many supply chain professionals will realize quite early on that once you take a step back and you start mapping your incoming raw materials, you start mapping the flow through your manufacturing sites, you start mapping your distribution, all the way from the raw materials, or sometimes even one step, behind, and then also all the way through to your customers. Then you will begin realizing, in most cases, at least in my view, that they are actually quite different. So I would really say the differentiation actually matters, because it is not one size fits all. But that does not necessarily make it easier to manage. But it's important to have the awareness and understanding and find out how to articulate that. And also, is it a matter of, making sure that your asset is always fully utilized? That may be the case where cost is of the essence. It may also be areas where you say, we really need to have some so that we can, swiftly turn around and have the agility whenever a customer comes in and really requires something, rather today than tomorrow. And it really has to go all the way right through to your suppliers as well when you're differentiating. So I would say that's part of it. And then the culture component, the change management part, that is being clear about the story. That is being clear again about the narrative of what is it we are trying to achieve, and that get the engagement going. And I think in Akzo Nobel in particular, we were super successful in also having the local engagement, the regional engagement, and the global part. So it was great to see how so many different individuals actually chip in, and there were different homepages, etc., where stories could be shared in relation to, okay, we have found ways of reducing electricity consumption or whatever could be stories that were shared. That has actually been amazing. So again, think about the broader organization. Think about also how to engage and motivate, and then really most can chip in with something. So that has been fantastic. And in many companies, it does not necessarily come very natural that, you talk with the other sides, you share ideas, etc. So to get that built and get that funneled, that makes a huge difference.
It sounds so easy for us sitting in our comfortable, warm offices that the supply chain strategy and the commercial strategy should be connected to the business strategy. But I think when our personal experiences, we know that hasn't happened, sometimes for miscommunication, sometimes for ambitions and misunderstandings. But did you find that there were ideas outside in the factory level in the plants that caused you to change some of your thinking by listening to people?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that is often the case. Also found the importance of connecting with the commercial colleagues. This is never an us and them kind of situation. I mean, ultimately, we are also here for our customers all together. But there are many examples. I think it's really a matter of how to bring those examples up. Whether you have a local place where you go and hand in your suggestions, or you send them in somewhere via email or whatever, it can be very simple. And then really get it shared. But that's for me part of the critical continuous improvement mindset that we all need. And then also understand again collectively that we cannot really be in a situation where we are trying to be everything for everybody. That means completely unlimited, let's say, inventory levels, and that is never working. I mean, nobody can afford that. And also in many industries, you also have shelf life problems if you try to do that. But also really, again, try to understand via a very good and strong integrated business management process. Are there new product introductions coming in? So doing a good job in kind of, new introductions, but also remember at the same point in time to retire some of the SKUs that are no longer active. So for me, that good house cleaning, that really should run like a clockwork. And then also be clear about the demand. How can we improve the forecast accuracy? That is not mission impossible. And how can we then be very agile, also making sure that we have the capacity and again, the capabilities prepared to manage that? So really trying to run that process. And that was one of the things for sure that was for me quite an eye-opener becoming part of DuPont, that, we used to work with the sales and operations planning process. But all of a sudden, I kind of began realizing this DuPont integrated business management process, that is actually an additional layer, an additional step. And that really ties it all very well together. So the sales and operations planning process, I mean, nothing wrong with that. But if you really want to click it all together, then there's an additional dimension. And running kind of 5 steps every month, I mean, I have really carried that with me forever after, which is super helpful. So thanks, Mark, because you were one of those who helped me initially to get into the fascinating world of the IBM and also the DuPont production systems about Lean Six Sigma, the continuous improvement part. So
well, I'm only delighted that you carried this forward. I mean, and it's a conversation I have quite often now in my consulting career, is that people are familiar with S&OP, and there's still a lot of improvement to have with S&OP, but there is another level when you're ready, and I mean when you're ready and your strategy dictates it, there's certainly a lot of benefit from making it the managing process of your business.
Absolutely. Yeah. Fully agree.
Yeah. So that's fabulous. I mean, I've now got a big sense of the passion that you have for making the supply chain not just a cost center, but differentiated supply chains to meet the business strategy so that it becomes value-add and a seamless end-to-end value chain. Even more so than supply chain, value chain from customer to raw material supplier, that it's all connected. But I think one of the other things that you've gone is giving that sense of purpose and strategy, not just to profit as a result, but also sustainability. Would you like to talk about that in your career?
Yeah, no, absolutely, for sure. Again, I think overall looking across your company, your business, looking across also supply chain in particular, there's always something we can contribute with. Whether it's looking into working with suppliers, can we improve maybe the sizes of what gets delivered. Is there something that can go into bulk as an example? Can we reduce the mileage and therefore the carbon footprint impact? In a number of the sites in Akzo Nobel, we were also installing solar panels as an example. We were trying to recirculate water, etc. I was also when I did Pong context in a situation where there was actually district heating usage and directly connected with one of our sites. That was one of the sites in Denmark. So I mean, just thinking about how many different things that can be done. So one is kind of the supplier side of the house, and in a number of industries actually there is a heavy carbon footprint because in some cases it's very, at least in the chemicals industry, it's very energy consuming. So that is an important area to discuss and to talk with the suppliers about what can be done and sharing the knowledge, bringing some of the suppliers together and then find out, okay, how can we how can we really see some tangible benefits trying to collaborate, a bit like network collaboration. Then in your own, let's say your own remit, your own footprint, whether it's the logistics part or the manufacturing part, again, I was mentioning solar panels as an example. Thinking about also how can you reduce, let's say, across your processes, looking into when making new capital investments, hey, what are the requirements also from a sustainable? And then also the customer part, really trying to connect between R&D with customers, but also commercial, obviously, and also supply chain to find out what kind of products, what can we offer as part of services or the products that will make customers have, as an example, a lower curing time or something else that really has an impact via the product you serve and send to different customers. So, I mean, from a sustainability perspective, we would typically talk about the impact we have on like 1, 2, and 3. And I think many will come to realize that your own remit, you can kind of really be on top of that and control that quite well. But it's kind of more challenging by nature when you're looking into the customer side and also looking into the supplier side. But trying to also network and bring sometimes the three parties together, that also sometimes give idea generation, that sometimes give you perspective as to, we haven't done that, we haven't thought about that. There's much that can be done also across industries, by the way. And again, also privately, we can all contribute with small things and small steps to get started. Also, simple examples like, okay, if you're not, let's say, in your warehouse, or if you're not operating, lights would switch off automatically, whatever. There's really something that can be done also at small scale. And it may not seem like a lot on a small scale of you individually or a local team, but it's all adding up quite sizable. So we can all, really contribute here. But it starts with me, it starts with us individually.
But I think it echoes to your point to move on. When you've made the transition from being operations, supply chain, being a cost center, to being part of a strategy with differentiated strategies for different product lines, sustainability suddenly becomes a value add. There are opportunities that open up, so it's not an either or profit or sustainability.
No.
The overlap is huge, but it takes that insight and the understanding of the whole value chain.
Absolutely.
Upstream and downstream of you. Yeah. So just remembering that the theme of this podcast is managing in complex adaptive times. I know you're a big champion for diversity and to help manage complex adaptive times. Can you speak to that at all?
Yeah, I'm happy to elaborate on that. So for me, diversity is really in its broadest sense. It is diversity of thought. It is diversity of different cultures. It is also gender diversity. And I've really seen fantastic examples over the years where we're trying to bring that together. Because if we are all alike and if we all kind of thinking along the same one or two dimensions, then it will also kind of, be more of the same. Whereas if you really try to bring in different perspectives, whether it's from different cultures or whether it's from different background or whether it's different gender, etc., we are different. And I think that difference altogether, that really makes it very interesting and also enriching way to come up with new creative solutions to, the innovation part. For me, there's a strong link also between the different, let's say, the diversity and also the innovation, because you suddenly get new ideas and you suddenly question in different ways. In Akzo Nobel, we had a global engineering trainee program, a GET program, we call it. And it was for me a true pleasure and privilege when I was getting around to, different locations in different parts of the world, to also have some one-to-one time with those different global engineering trainees, because they come from a new generation. They come directly from, engineering school or university, whatever. And they were just asking really refreshing questions. And again, bringing that diversity together, I could see out in the different locations that it was fantastic to see someone working with lots of experience and fantastic background and insight, with somebody coming with that fresh perspective. Some of the discussions and dialogues that gave, that was just like mind blowing and amazing. So yeah, I really, really, let's say, big fan, big supporter, very vocal around diversity. But again, diversity in a very broad
Absolutely. I mean, if we think about a definition of a complex adaptive system, it's
Mhm.
one where cause and effect are not apparent until after the solution is found. Whilst you're doing it, doesn't really matter how much expertise you have. You might have hypotheses, but you will not, by the nature of something being complex as opposed to
Yeah.
complicated, you
Yes.
cannot, expertise doesn't help. So you're spot on, I think.
Yeah.
Absolutely. The
And
more
then also
differing
remember, many of those youngsters, they kind of come without that filter. I know for a fact that many plant managers and some of my next level leaders, they were really super, super scared when I was sitting, together on my own with those new engineering trainees, because they were just like, oh, they are not necessarily asking the questions, like what we would have done it on. And that's absolutely true, but also very refreshing. They would just be straight. So sometimes I would also scratch my head as to, really, did I get that question? Okay, how do I now address that? So again, diversity in a broader sense is super important, and also challenge and ask the questions around status quo. And for me, the answer as to, this is always how we have done it, has always been how it's been around, that's not really the answer to give. Or then maybe it's at least time to then look into it and say, is that also really, the best way that going forward? That is not necessarily the case.
Thank you, Karen-Marie. So as we wrap up on what's been a great tour of the highlights of some of the highlights of your career, what's the best advice you would give a young professional who wants to transition from being sort of post-university technical specialist to a more broad-based human-centric leader in a complex adaptive world?
Yeah. So sure, there are many examples of individuals who like I did, started, let's say, with the more technical focus on the tools, and also focus on the systems part of the three dimensions, but also over time really truly came to realize, understand, and learn sometimes the hard way about the capabilities and why that really matters. So what I would say to young supply chain, let's say, professionals, make sure that you have a good understanding of the tools in the toolbox. That's a good starting point. Make sure that you also understand how are the different mechanisms actually working. Don't satisfy yourself with working into one area only, and then kind of you do that forever after. Go and explore. Whether you ask, raise your hand and ask for opportunities. Raise your hand to be part of projects, but make sure that you are continuously learning and also get experience. And that can be in very different ways. And you can get lots of on-the-job experience, by the way. You can also raise your hand and support with working on training modules for other colleagues. You can establish networks across different locations on your local site, etc. So there are many ways to go about this. And then also use some of the training that is available out there. There's lots of different training available, but make sure that you continue to develop yourself and challenge yourself. And then again, find some of the raw models, find some of the examples. I've had amazing mentoring during my career. And that's really also one of the things I would highly recommend. I'll never forget the first time I got mentoring offered. I had a boss actually in DuPont sitting in the US. And one day out of the blue, he called me and said, I think I've worked for him for 3 months. Then he called me and said, I'm going to give you a mentor. And my initial reaction was sitting, in Copenhagen, having this call from far away in Wilmington, Delaware, US. Wow, I thought, am I really doing such a bad job? It's really strange that he didn't tell me. And now he wants me all of a sudden to have a mentor. And that was kind of, what I articulated. I said to him really kind of flew out of me. Am I really doing that bad that now you want to give me a mentor? It got silent for a couple of seconds, but it felt like very long time to me. And then he was just laughing and saying to me, no, 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 no. He said, Karen-Marie, you completely misunderstand. We really want to support your growth, your leadership journey, your future career. That's why we're going to offer you a mentor. We don't do that with everybody, by the way, in the company. So just really take this as a positive. So, okay, my heartbeat kind of, calmed down a little bit. And then I began the journey of mentoring, which was absolutely fantastic. So also one of my former bosses was kind of mentoring me for some time period, and I'll just be forever grateful for that. So, offer yourself to be a mentee. Also say, hey, can I mentor somebody over time? That is also one of the ways to get going. And then look for different opportunities. I mean, I'm a living example of somebody that started early career in procurement, then moved more broadly in, to end-to-end supply chain, then part of leadership teams, executive committees, and then also, let's say, board roles, and have had for many years, so the non-executive director part. So, yeah, that has been exciting and really fabulous. And for sure, I also bring, let's say, the end-to-end supply chain with me when I'm sitting in, let's say, different boards. Absolutely.
Great. Thank you, Karen-Marie. It's so good to be back in touch after all of these years. Loved catching up with you. And I'm wishing you all the very best for your new challenge at Orkla. And we'll be following you with interest. Thank you for appearing.
Thank you very much, Mark. My pleasure. Thank you.
Great. Okay.
Thank you for listening to the Akzo Insights podcast. We hope you enjoyed it as much as we enjoyed producing it for you. If you have not done so already, please do subscribe with your favorite podcast provider. Even better, it would be hugely appreciated if you could share the podcast with friends and colleagues. Thank you.